Hello, everyone. If you can hear me, if you could just give a little thumbs up or let us know in the chat that you can actually see us and hear me, that would be wonderful. My name's Paul. So if you go to the right-hand side, you'll see chat. You'll also see a poll there, and I've got some people filling in the poll, which is great. So just the attendees on the side there, if you could possibly just jump into chat. I've got Hannah saying that she can hear and see me, which is great. So that means everything's on track from my end. Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Louise. Fantastic. Darlene, I can see you popping in. That's great. We've still got a minute or so before we kick off, but it's just important that you guys jump in the chat. I've got a little poll on the side. I'm just curious to see the preferred device you use. You might have both, for example, but I'm going to try and cater for everyone today going forward, which would be great. So it's clicked on 9:30. Just going to give another minute or so. We've got about 45, 46 people. Everyone seems to be jumping in, which is great. Once again, if you could just introduce yourself in the chat on the right-hand side, that would be wonderful. My name's Paul Hamilton. I'm not Mike, like it says there, Mike Redding, but I've logged in under Mike. So my name's Paul. Feel free to reach out. Hopefully we can make some great connections today going forward. Daniel's saying he can hear me loud and clear, which is awesome. Thank you so much. Wonderful to see people. I've got Leon there. Rob's in there. He's from Emmanuel. Fantastic. Lisa's in. Good morning, Jen. Desiree, good morning. Fantastic. Great to have you here. Wonderful. It looks like that's up and running, and I've got people logging in as we go. Just update my attendees there. Yep, that's fantastic. So that's looking really great. So those people that just joined us, if you could just introduce yourself in the chat section on the side. My name is Paul Hamilton. And I've also got a little poll there in the poll section underneath chat, where you can just tell me what your preferred device is, the one that you're probably going to be using for content creation and working remotely, and fully understand that you'll be jumping between both. So I understand that, which is fully understandable. So we've got a poll there, we've got a chat there, and in a minute, I'm going to give it one more minute. I'm going to share my screen and turn off my camera so that you can see me a little bit better, and you can see my screen a little bit better, and we can start working through. So thank you for those people that have introduced themselves on the side. Fantastic. Because you don't have microphones or access to speak today, I'm going to be stopping throughout the webinar and answering some of your questions on the side. If you could just be patient with me as I'm kind of jumping between screen share, and I probably won't have the chat in so I can make it bigger, but I will be jumping back to the chat throughout the webinar so I can answer your questions, which is great. Thank you for the feedback about being able to hear and see me. That's fantastic. I'm going to share my screen in a minute. If you could just jump into the chat and say, Paul, can definitely see your screen or not. That way I can get some feedback from you guys going forward. Just a couple of quick things. If I cut out at all, if my internet drops at my end, I'll do my best to jump back in and do that. So far, so good though. That shouldn't be a problem. If it's buffering from your side or you drop out, which we had a few occasions yesterday, just in the afternoon, there's not much I can do from that end. So if that happens, I guess just refresh your page, try and get back in, maybe try and kick the kids off Netflix or whatever we do to try and get that bandwidth up a little bit. But I'll do my very best from my end to help you through. So I'm just going to I'm going to screen share now and turn off my camera. If you could just give me a little comment to say that you can see that, that would be great. I'm going to share there, turn off camera, and jump in here. And I'm hoping that you can kind of see my screen going forward. I'll make that a little bit bigger in a minute. If you could just give me a comment to see if you can see my kind of Google slide there, that would be awesome. So I'll just back in there, can hear, can see and hear, can see and hear you. Fantastic. Looks like I'm almost right to go ahead with today's webinar. I'll just give everyone another second or two to make sure that they can see my screen. Should have Apple webinar, Paul Hamilton using tech better, and we'll go from there. So I'll just jump back in and just check, make sure everyone can see. Yep, all's looking good. Getting some good feedback there, so I'm right to go. I'm going to make that full screen and we're going to kick it off. I will jump back into the questions in Webinar Jam in our chat section as we go. And hopefully I can respond to your questions, but I can also get some feedback going forward. So my name is Paul Hamilton, and I'll be your facilitator today. What's my background? I'm a classroom teacher. So I've been a classroom teacher for 22 years. This is my first year out of the classroom, which takes a little bit of getting used to. So doing lots of training. I'm an Apple Distinguished Educator, so I have some Apple background there in regard to hopefully doing some cool stuff with Apple with my kids. Primary teacher by trade, but worked into the secondary school in the last couple of years. And for the last 5 or 6 years, I was head of learning technologies at Matthew Flinders College, where I coached and helped staff build their capacity with different technologies and to use hopefully effectively in the classroom. So that's where you can find me. That's where you can find Using Tech Better. We give a lot of good tips out as we go along across all platforms, Google, Microsoft, Apple, and so forth. And that's where you can find me on Twitter. Always find Twitter a fantastic professional learning network. So you've done a lot of this already. You've introduced yourself, which is fantastic, and answered the poll. Obviously, you don't need to mute your microphone. That's kind of there on default. And can I just really encourage you? I had a session on Seesaw yesterday, and some of the discussion in the chat where different teachers that had a little bit more experience were answering questions and supporting one another was a real magic moment for me. So if you could actually look at each other's questions, and if you've got some experience, I'm not the only expert in the room. There's certainly lots of people with a range of different experience with Apple. And so let's support each other going forward. I think that's really, really important. I'm going to jump out of this just quickly and have a look at my poll. Okay, so that's interesting. We've got a lot of kind of laptop, desktop there, which is great. You can see and hear the feedback's going okay, which is great. So I'll make that a bit bigger. So we're doing a great job of that, which is fantastic. That's where you can connect with UTB. We're across all socials, which is great. Now, at the end of this session, probably tomorrow morning, I will give you this slide deck. So I'll actually give it to you, and it will have some of these links in the document itself. So I'll give you the whole slideshow. It won't be all there because I'm going to do a lot of demonstrations today. I always find demonstrations are the best way to kind of look at content creation. So I'll be working live in Keynote and some other applications going forward. But please feel free to grab these presentations. They'll be on different websites, school websites, but they'll also be emailed to you as well with all these links. And if I could just go through some of these just really quickly. This one's a really good one at the top here. It looks at some of the things you can do from an administration point of view with setting iPads and laptops up remotely in regard to device management. And so there's some really great resources. We're not going to get into that too much today because it's all about content creation and creating these, I guess, engaging experiences with our children. But that's certainly a good one there. The second one is some tips and tricks about creating content in regard to using some of the, I guess, the core suite with Apple in regard to iMovie, Keynote, Pages, Numbers, and so forth. So some of those software pieces that you might be familiar with if you're an avid kind of Apple teacher and working with Apple products. This one here is actually a Pages document, great for junior primary. And it was released by the Department of New South Wales in conjunction with Apple. And it has some amazing creative ideas for kids learning at home for the P2 area. And it really does touch on some key curriculum documents too. So it has a little bit of maths, it has some visual arts, it has some literacy, a really good one. They've just released the 3 to 6 workbook as well, which is a Pages document, and that link will go straight to that book. If we have time, we'll have a little bit of a look at these at some stage because they are some fantastic activities for students that you could actually just attach to your learning management system or the way that you communicate with your students from work and home. So that's just something to look at. Here, they've also just released a secondary book too that has things like using animations in Keynote and some wonderful activities that get our students, our older students, working with a workbook from home. So you might be able to cut and paste and use some of those pages there as well. And there are some screen time, I guess, advice and some video tutorials that we've released, as well as Apple's released, in regard to looking at screen time apps, screen time app on iPad, for example, and how parents and students can kind of monitor and set some really healthy screen time habits going forward. So today's, I guess, about a lot of things. It's looking at some Apple software that we can actually use to create content and broadcasts from our Apple devices, but it's also looking at some other applications that you might have seen, that you might want to explore and play with, that might add a little bit or enhance what you currently do as well. So we're going to be looking at a range of different things. You'll get a link to the recording of this webinar if I go a little bit too quickly. I understand that if I was to put another poll in now and I said, what is your experience with creating content and screen recordings and that sort of thing, we're going to have a really wide variety of experience with that. So I'll go fairly slowly today, but I need you to know that you will get the recording of this webinar going forward so that you can watch it back at your own speed. Yeah, just wanted to do that. These are our key things that we're going to do today. We're going to look at, for a start, how to screen record, how to look at what we do on both a Mac and an iPad, and how we can actually record what we're actually doing so that we can then post them to our students. I'll have a quick look at some of the iPad things. I'm not going to jump into iPad on my screen, but I'll give you some screenshots of how to do that. We're going to jump into Keynote a little bit and how you can create some kind of interactive lessons, I guess, in Keynote, and how you can create some lessons that the students can actually do things with and then maybe submit back to you. We'll look at QuickTime. We'll look at iMovie quickly and how you can create some interesting lessons with iMovie and QuickTime. For example, screen in screen. We'll have a look at some of those things. We'll look at some different things like Explain Everything, probably not so much Seesaw, but also Book Creator and some other kind of platforms that you can use to do screen casting and screen recordings with, to maybe make use of the devices that you have at your disposal, both at home and at school, I guess, going forward. It's always good to know too what our students have at home, because some of the things that we'll create today, we're actually relying on our students having the right device or the software to actually access that content. There's no point spending an hour and a half on a lesson as a teacher, and then all of a sudden you're giving it in a file format that our students won't actually be able to receive. So just wanted you to be aware of that going forward as well. So the first thing I just wanted to jump in quickly, and I'm just going to jump out of this before I go and just go back to my, to make sure that you can hear me. It looks like you can still hear me, which is great. Giving me some feedback there would be wonderful. Let's make that full screen again. So if I could start with iPad. Now, can I also say that this is the same if you have an iPhone as well? So don't forget, if you've got other devices and you might not be as comfortable working on an iPad or an iPhone, but there could be some opportunities to do, for example, quick videos that you can actually transfer over to your Mac. And we know that it is so easy now with AirDrop, being able to AirDrop things to our Mac instead of emailing or even cloud sharing and iCloud sharing and that sort of thing. AirDrop is one of those things that we can do really easily. So the first thing, if we just wanted to record on our iPad, for example, we just use the camera app. We do this on our iPhone as well, and we just click on video. Now, obviously, we can get a little bit creative with that, and you can do things like slow motion. If you were demonstrating something that you wanted to then post to the students that showed, I don't know, rates of change. We won't go into that creativity side of that too much today. But one of the best things that you can do, if you've got a little whiteboard at home and you wanted to just give a quick demonstration of on a whiteboard how to do a maths concept, or how to do how to explain something in science, or a little checklist or a success criteria, don't be afraid to use what you currently use in your daily and personal life. So just jumping on an iPhone or an iPad, clicking on the camera app and actually recording a lesson at home, sometimes that's the best way to make a connection with your students going forward, because they can see what you are doing, they can hear your voice, and they can move forward. So once again, the simple thing like a camera app can work beautifully there. The other thing that a lot of people are not aware of, that after you take a video on your iPad or your iPhone, that now just in the built-in settings, when you go to edit, you can actually crop your video, eliminate those bits that you don't want the person to see. If you've accidentally made a recording and it's lopsided, for example, it's taken on the wrong orientation, that you can flip it by going up to the top, right at the top up here. We can trim it, we can apply filters to it, we can turn off the sound, which is up here as well, if you wanted to do a sound recording over the top of your video, and I'll show you how to do that in iMovie later on. And we can do a range of different things. We can slow the speeds down and do a range of things just by clicking on edit in the photo app when that video goes to the photo app at the end. So just be aware, if something's happened and you want to crop something out, or you just want to get a little tiny aspect of the screen that you videoed, you can do all that now in the photo app, which is super handy going forward. Screen recording on an iPad, and I'll get into QuickTime in a minute, screen recording on your Mac in a minute, but one of the most underutilized tools is screen recording on an iPad. So what you need to do if you're on your device, and this is similar with your phone, is if you just drag your finger down the top right-hand corner of your device, you will see pop up your control panel, and you'll see over here that you've got a record button. Now, if you haven't got the record button, you'll need to go to Control Center in your settings and actually turn that on to make sure that you've got access to it. But the great thing about screen recordings is once you've pressed that, you can demonstrate learning explanations in any app, and it's going to record the whole thing. So you can actually use the app of your choice and just record your whole screen. And I'd encourage you to do that. So if you're familiar in Book Creator and you've got some interactive lessons in Book Creator, just record your screen, open up Book Creator, and off you go. Now, I mentioned that it might not be available to you. So really simply, if you go to your settings on your phone or your iPad and you go to Control Panel and you go to Custom Controls over here, you'll see all of the apps or tools that you've got access to when you drag your finger down and open your control center. So if you actually go to that, that's just a great way of turning on that sound recording, which is really, really important. You'll see there the ones that you've got at the top and the ones that you can add to that pull down screen, that control panel that you might like to add going forward. Things like magnifiers and different ranges of different things are really handy for students to know about as well if they've got iPads at home. Now, once you've done that, it will pop up. One of the things that you can do is if you hold your finger down on that, that will give you some options down here to turn your microphone on, or you can even here, let me just see if I've got that here, you can actually broadcast directly to Zoom, Microsoft, Google Meet, and some different things as well. So if you actually want to actually broadcast to a set room, do that on an iPad. A little bit of a warning there, it's always good, so it actually knows what it's connecting with. You might find it's actually better just to do a screen recording than a broadcast, and you can just turn on, you have a little bit more control when you're actually posting content. I've had kind of mixed reports about being able to do that successfully. One of the tips that I would have for you would be definitely just taking your time and actually making sure that you've got Microsoft Teams open, the app open, or Zoom open, or Meet open, so it's connecting properly between those two. I'm going to stop there just for a second and jump back over here and just see if we have any questions so far of what we've done. I know that we've done a fair bit in regard to, I'll stop sharing and go back here. I know we've done a lot of bit on iPad and screen recordings, but I just wanted to go through that first before we jump into the Mac version going forward. So if you've got any chat, anything or any comments or anything that you'd like to know about just based on what we've done there, if you could just post in the question section in the chat section there, and I'll just have a little bit of a look and just kind of keep monitoring to see if any questions actually come through. So it doesn't look like we've got too many questions. Hopefully I'm still here. If you could just give me a little bit of a thumbs up or a little bit of comment in the chat section to make sure that I'm still broadcasting. That's always something that I like to hear, to make sure, because sometimes when there's no messages coming through, I kind of get a little bit concerned in regard to that aspect here. If I look at the poll, I've definitely got most people using laptop and desktop, so we'll get to that there going forward. So if you could just give me a little bit of a chat there going forward to see if I'm actually there or not. I've got a chat that's just come through, which is great. Excellent. It looks like I've got some people that are actually chatting and actually doing some things. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Darlene. Can still hear me and see me, which is great. Fantastic going forward. So I've got someone that's wanting to speak. If you could just put it in the comments there, Brad, that would be awesome. Just so that I can actually see going forward. Actually, I'm going to accept this, Brad, and then I'll disconnect you later on. No requests. Have I got it here? Oh, yeah. Hannah and Darlene are saying that they can still hear me going forward, which is great. So we've got some different percentages and so forth going forward. Let's have a look at my attendees. Yep, they're still there. So I'm going to persevere and go forward. Please pop in any questions that you have going forward. So let's jump back. I'm going to do my screen share and I'm going to turn, let me quickly cancel that, turn off my screen, but then share my screen, and I'll jump back here. So we've done a little bit with iPad there, looking at how we can broadcast, how we can screen record, which is great. Most of you have mentioned that we are on a Mac, which is great. I just put this here. This is just a little notes thing that I was playing with the other day, and I was thinking, going through notes and looking at websites and that sort of thing, just doing a screen recording as you're actually talking over the top is a great way of explaining something to our students. So often we think we've got to build these complex presentations for our students. It could simply be going through a website and just highlighting to our students different things in that website that we might like to actually highlight to our students, or paragraphs, or just noting over the top, or doing a quick screenshot and then annotating over the top the different things in that website we might like to do. So that was just an example, I guess, of how we could use screen recording just to actually have an audio recording over the top. So I've stopped there. Okay, let's go to Mac. So if you're wanting to do a screen recording on your Mac, QuickTime is the best, I have found the best way to do that. So if you do a search at the top, let me just get out of that. If you go right at the top up here and you do a Spotlight search for QuickTime, you should have access to that. So it comes with Mac. So that's something that I think having a play with, and I'll go through a couple of the settings now in QuickTime that you might like to use. When you open QuickTime, you need to go up to File. It might look like it hasn't opened, but if you go up to the top and you click File, you'll get some different options. Obviously, down the bottom here, we can look for files that we've already opened, or image sequences and PNGs and different things, or recent. But at the top here, we've got some different options. So we can do a movie recording. So think of that like I'm standing in front of the camera and I'm actually projecting outside of my computer. So I could actually turn on my webcam or whatever it is and actually record myself speaking. Or if I use the back camera on my Mac or different aspects of it, I can actually do the other side. I could do just an audio recording. So I could actually just record my voice and attach that to something in Keynote, or in my learning management systems or Teams or Google. I can actually do audio recordings as well. And probably the one that you're going to use the most, which I'm going to demonstrate today, is looking at screen recordings. Now, this is where you press that and you can actually highlight parts of the screen that you can actually record. Okay, so that's a really good feature, and you can actually restrict what part of the screen you might like to record as well. So QuickTime Player is brilliant for that. So when you actually click on screen recording, it's going to ask you, what do you want to record? Do you want to take just a screenshot, a snapshot of your screen, which you can also do with Command-Shift-4, and you can do a quick screenshot there as well. But it gives you some options down the bottom. So you can actually record parts of your screen, or you can actually record your full screen. Personally, I normally do the full screen, and I make sure that my windows are nice and big. And then at the end of my recording, I might do a little bit of cropping or trimming or doing some different things with that as well. And it gives you some options. Always check your audio. There's nothing worse than doing an awesome screen recording and you find that your sound's not on. So it's always good to do a little bit of a test run. And we've got some record buttons there. So QuickTime is a fantastic way of recording those screens straight away. At the top of your screen, there'll be a little button that shows that you are actually recording your screen. So it's always good to jump in there and actually stop that. And what it will do is it will basically save to your desktop at the end of it. And then you've got some different options with your actually exporting. Before you export though, you can actually do some quick editing. So you can do some things like flipping and actually flip the videos and do little bits like that. You can do things like removing audio if you find that that's no good. You can put little clips at the end of your video and you can trim it, which I use quite a bit. So you can actually pull these little kind of anchor points, these little timelines here, and actually clip parts of it, because you might find at the start of your presentation, might be not what you want to include. So you just do a little bit of a trim and then you can do some different things with it. Now, I just wanted to highlight this quickly with your screen recordings, with your QuickTime, that you might like to know about. And that the first one is, think about the purpose of what you want to export it as and how it will be used with your students. Obviously, 480 is really small in regard to resolution, but it could be something that you could use because it might be just a shot of yourself speaking and you don't need it to be 4K or high res. So don't forget, these are pretty big file types, and it's always good to think about, do I need clarity in my screen recording? If I do, absolutely go up, but also think about things like bandwidth at home for our students and what they're actually requiring to actually do with that video going forward, where it's going to be posted, what are our limitations going there as well. So it's always good to go bigger, obviously, because you can't actually go up after you've exported it at small. You can't actually increase that res, but normally 720 or 1080 pixels in resolution is enough for you to actually record your screen effectively for a student to actually demonstrate what they actually need. If you're doing an art recording or something on the screen in regard to art and you need to really see defined parts, then obviously you can increase your resolution as you go through. Okay, so just something to be aware of in regard to QuickTime and exporting that going forward. Definitely check when you're doing audio recordings, just with your settings, but here is just a little quick screenshot of what it looks like as an audio recording. So once again, this is just audio, and you can actually use those in Keynote and some other things as well, which I'll demonstrate in Keynote going forward when we have a look at how we can create some interactive lessons with Keynote. Got some questions there. So that's kind of the end of just that kind of screen recording on Mac and iPad and going through those different things. We're going to go through some of these other applications, but what I wanted to do quickly is jump into Keynote and have a look at some of the interactive lessons that we can create for our students and going forward as a content creator. I also want to look at iMovie quickly and how we can use those different things going forward as well. So if I jump back into Webinar Jam here and just see if I've got any questions going forward, I'll turn off my screen. Doesn't look like I've got too many questions here going forward. I've still got some people, lots of people in the chat. If you could just write a little chat there and give me some feedback about whether you actually can see. Have you used QuickTime before? If you could give me some feedback there, if you've used QuickTime to screen record, that would be great, just in the chat section. If you've used Broadcast with iPad, I'd love some feedback there just in the chat down the side. if you could jump in there and just give me some feedback whether you've used those or not, what you've found easy to use, what you've found difficult to use going forward. So if you could jump into the chat just for 2 minutes and just give me some feedback on whether you've used those two tools, that would really be beneficial for me so that we can get this collaboration going a little bit going forward, which would be wonderful. Okay, so if I go up to the top here, we've got Microsoft Teams allows you to record system audio. Thanks, Rob. Absolutely. Let's have a look down here at some of the questions. Is there a way for me to record screen without recording external sound? Yes, you can definitely do that. So you can turn both on iPad and Mac different ways that you can record. You just turn your audio off. So if I'm recording on QuickTime, I have some options there. So if I go up to QuickTime quickly and I give a little bit of a demo here, hopefully this is not going to kick me out. Right at the top up here, I'm going to share my screen. Turn that. Let me share my screen here so that you can see. So if I go right up the top here and I go to QuickTime, you'll see I've got my file, and when I go to new movie recording, I've got some different options. So once I go on that, I'm reluctant to do that because I've got my webcam going at the moment for this webinar. But once you do that, you can turn your audio on and off there. So that's just something that you can actually do going forward. Let me go back in here and turn that off. Okay. Rob was just asking about system audio, so you can turn that off and on, Rob. So that's great. I can't edit videos taken on iPhone 5, but I can on my iPad. Time for a new phone. Yeah, Daniel, that's another webinar and discussion we can we can open right up in regard to updates and so forth. Yes, they are big files. So Jackie, you just asked about the file size, and they are big files. Especially, that's why it's important to, when you are exporting, to actually think about what you're going to go to. So one of the things that is good to know is that when you're recording, for example, on an iPad, one of the newer ones, it is recording in high definition and kind of very detailed. So just be aware of that when you're exporting them going down. Melissa, to get to screen recording, go to settings. Thank you, Melissa, for holding down. That's awesome. Okay, so Kelly, yeah, keep trying. Sometimes it's kind of dragging your finger down from the top right-hand corner. It's hard to know, Kelly, I guess, what kind of iPad might need updating, for example, if it's been a little while since it's updated to an iOS. Some of these latest features have happened quite recently, although they have been around for a little while, so that should be good. The sound on iPad, yep, so no microphone popped up on your iPad to get the sound going. So you should have that. That's a really good question, Sandra. So when you go down, I haven't seen that before, if there's no microphone popped up. So I might do some research with that and just see if there's any kind of technical issues. I think one of the things we do need to do is make sure, once again, all those updates are made. I know this sounds very IT crowdish, but turning things off and on again if it's been 2 years or a little while. I'm not saying that that's the case with you guys, but making sure that we've turned iPads on and off again and those different things there as well, which is great. Kelly says, I found it by double clicking the home button. Okay, so we've got some different options of actually finding that as well. Tracy just asked about QuickTime be compatible with other devices other than Mac. It's normally a Mac application, Tracy, and I'm not sure about the extent across other platforms, but there's some there as well. So when you're recording, once again, especially on Mac, if you go to QuickTime and you actually look for that little microphone or the little drop-down menu, it's always good to have that on. Make sure that you haven't got mute on too with your sound when you're actually listening back. I think we'll probably be able to find that a little bit as we go forward. Thank you for all those questions. They are brilliant questions. So I'm actually looking at those and monitoring those as we're going forward, which is great. Great to see people kind of chipping in. Great to see people are actually chipping in regard to kind of solving problems and finding other ways of doing something. Obviously, with iPad, there's different little functionalities you can do about dragging fingers, double clicking on home screens, and some different things to actually find control panels. Okay, so that first session was looking at, definitely looking at screen recording, not so much broadcasting on a Mac, but definitely screen recording, and being able to have all of the resources that you normally use on your Mac or your iPad and saying, hey, I don't have to reinvent the wheel here. I can actually screen record and give my students kind of run-throughs of resources that I've already created on my devices. Often with this remote learning, we're thinking about we have to create everything from scratch, and it's not the case. It could be as simple as bringing up an image that you found on the internet for persuasive writing, and you actually just bring it up, screen record yourself talking over the top of it. Is a great way of actually creating video files that you can post to your students going forward, which is great. Okay, so what I actually want to do now is just jump into a couple of different applications and see how we can use that to build some content, possibly with materials or digital assets that you've already got, and how we can use that to kind of create these, I guess not more engaging, but just a little bit more interactive. So I'm going to turn off my face here and just turn on my screen share again. And I'm going to jump down to Keynote. So I'm going to go down to Keynote, and hopefully you can see my screen. And I'm going to go to a new Keynote. Now, Keynote's just done a really big update for those people who haven't seen it and kind of don't use Apple software too much. I absolutely love Keynote. It's one of the kind of presentation pieces of software that I think goes well beyond presentations. And I think it's a really viable option to PowerPoint and Google Slides as well. I think there's some really nice assets there in regard to creating content for our students, but also our students creating content as well. So I'm just going to go with a really classic, boring old white template here, everyone. And I just want to show you a couple of things in regard to how we might create some interactive lessons. And I might just do it on the one slide here. So I'm just going to click on some of these and delete. And I might just do a little lesson here. Just quickly put that on my desktop so that doesn't keep popping up. I'm going to do a little lesson on anatomy. And we might just put Science 101. And I'm going to make my screen just a little bit smaller, just so that you can see the whole page. Hopefully you can see that. And I'll just move this up. So what I just wanted to show you guys today are just some of the things that you could do in Keynote and some of the export options. Now, please don't switch off if you think, oh, I've got an iPad. It pulls actually on a Mac here on Keynote. You can do all this and more on an iPad. Probably the iPad also gives you that functionality of being able to take images that you can insert quickly and videos and so forth going forward. So some of the things that we can do in Keynote to create some interactive lessons, and I'm going to go through some of the exporting features here about how we could use those in our current workflow, is I'd just like to design a little bit of a lesson here and show you some of the things that we can do. So Keynote has some really nice shapes. So some of the things that we might be able to use for one of these lessons, for example, are our shapes. So we've got some bones here, and I might be doing a little interactive lessons on bones or some other things. And you can see here that we've got some other things that we can kind of layer. We won't go into the design elements too much, but some of the things that we can actually do with these shapes, for example, is at the top right-hand corner, we can do some formatting. So we might change the opacity of that first one, and we can kind of layer different things in. So this might come in handy in regard to kind of layering different aspects of Keynote shapes in regard over to the top. We can also do things like arrange and send things up to the top or down to the bottom. We can rotate, we can do a range of different things. We can also bring in obviously some text shapes. So at the top here, we might put, let's just put skull. And we might be able to create some interactive lessons here in regard to doing some different things here. So if I put skull there, let's put a bit of color into it. And we might have a range of different things on the side here that students actually have to come over and label. Students might create their own text, and I'll show you how to make that editable as well. Now, as a teacher, one of the great things that we can do is we can actually insert ourselves into our lessons a little bit, so we're building those relationships. So I just did a quick movie recording that I'm dragging myself into here that's got nothing related to science, but I could actually, as the teacher, have a little video recording, and all I actually did there was just drag my QuickTime file directly onto my Keynote. So all of a sudden, we're getting this element that has rich media in it, as well as instructions from the teacher that might help explain different assignments or projects going forward in Keynote. So this is just a little way there. We can also do some different things in Keynote as well. So we've got some format options. We've got some animate that we'll go into a minute. We've got our document and how we can change the different presentation types over here. If your students have iCloud all set up from a school administration point of view, you can also collaborate with different students through iCloud or other teachers. But there are some little things that I showed you at the start of this webinar that your school needs to do to ensure that that's going to work seamlessly. So I'm just really conscious of those different things. We can make comments down the side. Obviously, as a teacher, I might put some little comments down here. Please ensure that we can just do some little comments here that we can actually place in different parts where students can actually collaborate on as well if they've got that iCloud set up, or it could be just a little checklist or a reminder or something there as well. We can also insert a range of different things here. So we can import directly if you've got an iPad that you're working with straight away. So if you do a sketch on your iPad, for example, you can add that directly from your iPad, which is pretty cool. We can record here, which is an audio file that we might be able to insert directly. So if I click on that, it says it's recording my voice at the moment, and audio recordings are also on iPad as well. And we can just insert that too into here. So we might have some instructions here at the top that students can actually go through. Now I'm just going to quickly create another page just so you can see my export in a minute and how we can actually do that. What else can we do here? We can obviously insert tables, graphs, interactive graphs, and some different things that you might be useful for. Keynote also does a really good job of trying to identify if you've got an existing PowerPoint that you want to use. It won't be perfect, but it does its best and actually is quite compatible when you bring in PowerPoints and creating Keynote files out of them. We've got our text that we've shown. We've got each of our shapes there as well. Okay, and we've got lots of different shapes that we can actually bring in as well. We can also drag in directly images that we might have saved on our desktop or otherwise. So here I've got a little checklist for a science lab report that I might actually include there for the students to actually reference in regard to typing up their science report as well. So there's some range of different things we have. We can insert some movies. We can add a sketch, which once again, it's looking for my iPad there, which is pretty cool. My iPad on the left just went a little bit crazy, which is great. And so we can insert a range of different things going forward as well. We can do lines. We can draw with pen. And so you can kind of draw different shapes as well, which is pretty good. Might close that path. So we can kind of include different things there, which is pretty cool. I'll just delete that because that's a little bit annoying. And so there's a range of different ways that we can actually create some different things there. Obviously, movie, image, line, graphs, tables, and so on. With iPad, we've got that probably that advanced feature of being able to draw as well if you've got Apple Pencils and different styluses that you can use with iPad as well. And we can insert some different things as well. So that's just looking. If you look at that page there, we've got kind of some rich different activities, including video, that we can actually that we can actually include in some of our assignments, projects, or instructional teaching. If I quickly look here before I go back to some more questions, let me just show you one other feature that you might like to have a look at going forward. So if I actually turn that off and bring down a shape, let's look for a map. Let's say we're doing a geography lesson and we're looking at explorers or something like that. We might be able to bring in just a little shape here. Let's go with a ship. See if we can find a ship. And I might make that a different color really quickly so you can see it. There are some lovely little animations that the students can not only do assignment-wise, but also might be a way of you creating some engaging interactive content with what you give the students as well. So what you can do here is if I right-click, we can actually break apart those different things and we can do a range of different things if I right-click on it. If I go up to text style, I can arrange some different things, but right up the top there, I can also animate. Next to my format button, I can actually add an action. So I can do a range of different things there. Opacity, I can do a whole lot of different kind of effects actually building in. I can actually build things in to make it actually come through there as well. So there's some different things that you can do in regard to building simulations and a range of different things within Keynote that you might like to actually look at as well. And once again, this could be something that you can screen record over the top. But let's just say we want to get this template or this assignment to our students. Obviously, it's not in a perfect state. But what we can do is I just want to go through some of these export different aspects that we can actually send to our students. So if I go up to File and I go down to Export, it gives me some different options. Obviously, if I'm going to export this as a PDF file, it's not going to have those multimedia aspects like the video. So just be aware that when it's mainly visuals that we're looking at with PDFs, and some of these multimedia aspects like video are not going to work. It works really well with PowerPoint. So if you are a school that's using Teams, for example, and you'd like to convert that to a PowerPoint and actually feel like it works better in a Teams and a Microsoft 365 environment, PowerPoint is a really good option. This one I want to look at just quickly. I can actually export this as a whole movie file. And what it does is it plays the audio files, it plays the movie files, and then just progresses to the next slide. So if I wanted to do a movie file here, just to have a look, I've got some different options in regard to exporting that Keynote file as a movie. So this could be really good for an instructional phase where you put yourself in it, you've got activities, and you've got kind of drag and drop activities as well. So it's self-playing. We can go to the next slide and dictate how long it is before it goes to the next slide. And what it'll do is it'll package that up into a movie file that plays all the different elements at a certain speed. Now, obviously, you're not going to be able to edit that file. And if you want the students to do drag and drop, they won't be able to. But this could be a good way of actually just presenting some information that you're pulling together in a slide deck that you could then export as a movie file to give to your kids. Let's say that you didn't want to do that and you wanted the students to be able to manipulate some of the assets that are here. For example, drag and drop. Obviously, it needs to be exported as a Keynote file in order for the students to be able to edit those items. They might be doing drag and drops. They might be adding additional features, and then they could export and give it back to you as a movie file, a PDF, or a Keynote file as well. So there's just some different options in regard to using Keynote to create some a little bit more dynamic kind of lessons for your students going forward, but to also use some of these assets that you've already got that you could kind of drag into the one place using some Apple software going forward. There's also some other options. It does animated GIF or GIFs really well. Just remember it's about the file size. So it would be better doing a quick site simulation of something, rise and fall, something that's relatively small. And what that will do is it'll put all of your animations together in a kind of little GIF format in regard to going forward there. So that was kind of a little bit of a snapshot into Keynote and how you might be able to use that effectively going forward in regard to creating some projects or assignments or some content or some explicit teaching that you can then pass on to your students. So what I'm going to do now is just jump back into